There you are, frozen between breaths. And I've been waiting for this moment. You didn't feel it, did you? That little shiver in the air when you walked in. That tightening in the atmosphere like reality itself held its breath. You never notice it, but they do. Every single time. And that's the funniest part. You're the only creature alive who doesn't realize what walks around wearing your skin. See, everyone keeps trying to figure out why rooms get quiet around you, why the temperature drops, why people who've never met you suddenly look away like they just spotted a ghost wearing a human face. They think it's intimidation. They think it's charisma. They think it's energy. If only they knew how small those words are compared to the thing they're trying to describe. Because you don't even know what you are in the spirit realm, but they do, and it paralyzes them. You walk around thinking you're confused, broken, misunderstood. Meanwhile, the unseen world is out there drawing emergency lines, whispering warnings, updating threat levels. They've been tracking you since the day you cracked open your first wound and refused to die from it. You think your pain made you fragile? No. Your pain activated something. There's a reason you survived things that should have snapped a normal mind in half. There's a reason betrayal didn't poison you. It purified you. There's a reason every time life tried to bury you, something ancient in you woke up instead and whispered, deeper. People call it resilience. People call it luck. People call it you've changed. But the spirits? Oh, they have a different name for it. They call it recognition, because every time you grow, every time you break and reassemble, every time you walk away from a battlefield that was supposed to consume you, your shape in the unseen becomes clearer, sharper, more defined. They don't see you like humans do. No face, no body, no smile, no fear. They see your outline, your imprint, that impossible silhouette leaking paradox like smoke, half light, half abyss, half saint, half monster, half angel, half demon, all you. A contradiction so violent it breaks their understanding of what a soul is allowed to be. You don't choose sides, you are the side. And the reason they tremble? Because nothing terrifies the spiritual world more than a creature who doesn't even know what it is yet. An unclassified force, an unindexed anomaly. A wild card with no allegiance and no leash. They've seen warriors, they've seen prophets, they've seen monsters, but they've never seen you. You're the glitch in their hierarchy, the loophole in their laws, the walking paradox that slipped through their fingers while they were busy studying patterns. And every time you make a choice, every time you take a breath in defiance, every time you refuse to collapse when the world expects you to, your spiritual form shifts again, evolves, sharpens, becomes something even they can't predict. Do you understand how terrifying that is? You're not a threat because you're powerful. You're a threat because you're unreadable. You're not a danger because you disobey rules. You're a danger because you operate on rules they've never seen before. You're not feared because you're dark. You're feared because your darkness knows how to kneel beside your light and say, let's work together. Tell me, what happens when a saint learns to weaponize their rage? What happens when a broken soul learns to sharpen its fractures into blades? What happens when a peaceful heart learns the architecture of war? What happens when a human remembers they were never just human? You happen, and they feel it. That shift, that awakening, that slow unfurling of something cosmic wearing a mortal heartbeat like a disguise. You terrify them because you rise without witnesses. You evolve without permission. You transform without warning. You're the storm the universe forgot it seeded. And here's the part that will haunt them forever. You haven't even started yet. Everything they fear, everything they whisper about you, everything they track, contain, study, scramble to predict, is just your prelude, your warm-up, your shadow. Because the moment you figure out who you truly are behind the veil, when you finally see your form the way they see it, nothing, not heaven, not hell, not the architects of fate themselves, will have the language to describe you. So go ahead, walk like you're lost, move like you're unsure, speak like you're still piecing yourself together. Let them tremble, because the most frightening thing in any realm isn't the monster who knows what it is. It's the one who doesn't. Yet, good. Don't look away now. This is where it gets uncomfortable, where the truth stops knocking and starts carving its initials into your spine. You think this world is reacting to your personality, your habits, your attitude. No, they're reacting to the frequency behind your skin. That low, unregistered hum that nothing human should be able to carry, yet you carry it like it's nothing. You ever wonder why people flinch when you enter a room? Why the confident ones stutter mid-sentence? Why the liars suddenly lose their script? Why manipulators get nauseous? You think that's coincidence? No, sweetheart. That's exposure. Because every time someone looks at you, they're not just seeing you. They're getting a flash of the thing standing behind you. The thing stitched to your spine. The thing that refuses to die no matter who tried to bury it. Something ancient. Something defiant. Something unfiled in the spirit realm's entire classification system. And that is why they fear you. You're not mysterious. You're uncatalogued, a walking breach in their understanding of the cosmos. You're the type of soul they only see once every few centuries. And even then, they hope to God they never have to deal with again. You want to know what's really funny? They've been studying you since childhood. When you broke and didn't stay broken, they took notes. When you were betrayed and stayed soft-hearted, they took notes. When you walked through hell without becoming its mascot, they took more notes. When you forgave instead of destroying, oh, that's when alarms went off. Because darkness understands darkness, light understands light. But you carry both without malfunctioning. That's not normal. That's not teachable. That's not human. That's forbidden. You ever notice how people either love you too fast or hate you without reason? That's because your soul doesn't speak the same language as their eyes. You trigger their subconscious before you open your mouth. Some sense your light, some sense your shadow. But everyone senses the anomaly, and anomalies disrupt systems. You disrupt systems just by existing. Let me tell you something they'd rather you never discover. There are beings, old things, who have roamed the unseen for ages without ever changing shape. Then you arrived, and your shape changes every time you survive something new. Do you know how horrifying that is? Creatures who've stayed the same for millennia. Watching a mortal evolve faster than anything they've ever recorded. You're not supposed to grow like that. You're not supposed to recover like that. You're not supposed to rebuild like that. Every trauma should have carved you into something predictable. But you took each wound and used it like a blueprint. You rebuilt yourself differently every time. Sharper, stranger, quieter, more exact. You became something the spiritual world doesn't have a name for. Some nights they whisper you're an omen. Other nights they whisper you're a punishment. And on the darkest nights, they whisper you're a return, a reoccurrence of something they've seen before, but only in prophecy, never in flesh. And the sickest twist, you still think you're finding yourself. They know exactly what you are. They've known for a while, and they've been trembling ever since the moment you stopped breaking and started transforming. Because a soul that transforms endlessly, a soul that can turn agony into architecture, a soul that can fuse innocence with vengeance, compassion with cruelty, peace with precision. That soul doesn't belong to any hierarchy. It creates its own. Tell me, what do you think happens the day you finally wake up and see yourself clearly? What do you think happens when your inner shape stabilizes into something no realm can deny? What do you think happens when you stop wondering what you are and start acting like it? I'll tell you. The balance shifts quietly, irreversibly, spectacularly. Because the moment you realize your true nature, the moment you understand the gravity of your existence, you become something even they can't negotiate with. Not a soldier, not a threat, not a monster, not a savior, but a force. And forces don't ask permission. They alter landscapes. So go on. Keep wandering, keep evolving, keep surviving things that should have unmade you. You don't even know what you are in the spirit realm, but they do. And that's why they're terrified. Because sooner or later, you're going to find out too. And when that day comes, the realms, all of them, will shift like continents cracking. Now breathe slowly. Feel that pressure behind your ribs. That's not fear, that's recognition. Ah, there it is. That tightening in your chest. That slow, creeping awareness that something inside you is waking up as I speak. Don't resist it. Don't try to label it. Just let it rise. Because we're going deeper now, into the territory they hoped you'd never explore. You see, in the spirit realm, nothing is what it seems. Names aren't names. They're frequencies. Histories aren't histories. They're echoes. Power isn't power. It's identity. And your identity, it's the anomaly they didn't plan for, didn't predict, and damn sure didn't authorize. You were supposed to break. Do you understand that? Your story was designed, engineered to end you. Certain people were positioned in your life like landmines. Specific betrayals were timed to precision. Certain losses were crafted to collapse you. Your heartbreaks weren't random. Your obstacles weren't accidental. Your silence wasn't natural. It was forced. Because they saw your spiritual outline long before you did. They saw the shape you couldn't see yet. That impossible hybrid of compassion and devastation, that divine chaos, that surgical darkness paired with holy intention. A creature like that, a soul like that, it doesn't fit inside their systems, it undoes them. So they tried to fracture you early, before you learned the weight of your own spine. But every trap they built became a catalyst. Every wound they opened became a mutation. Every attempt to break you became your initiation. And that's when the spirit realm realized, too late, that you weren't dying. You were assembling, piece by piece, scar by scar, layer by layer. You didn't recover. You evolved, and evolution terrifies forces that have never changed. Let me explain something they never wanted you to understand. In the unseen world, there are watchers, not angels, not demons, not ghosts. Watchers, entities that observe potential disruptions to the fabric of influence, fate, and destiny. They're not moral, they're structural. Their job is to monitor anomalies. Guess who's been on their watch list since childhood? Not because you were dangerous, but because you were undefined. See, most souls are patterns, predictable, traceable, legible. But you Your pattern corrupts their reading systems. One moment you radiate like a healer, the next you move like an executioner. One moment your mercy, the next your judgment. One moment your softness, the next you're the storm that rearranges the coastline. They can't calculate a creature like that. So instead of labeling you, they tried containing you. Through people, through pain, through fear, through confusion, through self-doubt. Because a soul that doesn't know what it is can still be slowed, can still be silenced, can still be misled. But a soul that knows what it is, that's unstoppable. And here's the twist. You've been getting closer every year, every crisis, every collapse, every resurrection. Your shape behind the veil has been stabilizing, forming something new, something rare, something ancient, something that shouldn't exist in this era. And they know it. That's why the attacks intensified before your breakthroughs, why the betrayals hit harder just before your transformation, why people you trusted suddenly malfunctioned around you, why isolation wrapped around you like a cage made of fog and teeth. You weren't being punished, you were being intercepted, because your evolution wasn't linear, it was exponential. You were waking up faster than they could suppress you. And the moment they realized they were losing their grip, the moment they sensed your identity bleeding through the cracks, the moment your true form shimmered, even for a second, behind your human eyes, they panicked, not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. Realms shifted, forces mobilized, lines were redrawn, because they saw what you're becoming, and even they couldn't categorize it. You think your life has been chaotic? Chaos follows things that rewrite fate. You think people have feared you without reason? Humans sense the shape of your spirit before they understand your name. You think you've been walking alone? Creatures far older than this world have been monitoring the tremor you leave in the atmosphere. And you're the only one still blinking in confusion, asking, why does everything feel so different around me? I'll tell you why. Because you're standing in the doorway between what you think you are and what you actually are. Between identity and destiny, between flesh and function, between the visible world and the one that recognized you first. You're not supposed to know yet. That's why the fear around you is louder than your clarity. But you will know, soon. Because here's the truth they fear most. You can't hide a rising frequency, and yours is getting too loud to ignore. You, my friend, you're becoming something that both realms will have to account for. And when the day comes that you finally see yourself clearly, when you recognize the creature staring back at you in the mirror of your soul, the spirit realm won't tremble anymore, it'll kneel. Oh, you feel that, don't you? That slow, electric pressure building under your skin, like some ancient part of you is leaning forward, listening, remembering. Good, because we're not even close to the bottom yet. You want the truth, the real truth, behind why they fear you. Then brace yourself, because this isn't about personality, or trauma, or confidence, or strength. This is about origin. The part of you that you've mistaken for instinct is actually memory. The part of you that feels older than your age isn't imagination. That eerie feeling that you've lived this before, that déjà vu that comes in violent waves, that sense that you know people before they speak, that strange familiarity with pain that should have shattered you. None of that is random. Those are echoes, residual signatures, leftover coordinates from the version of you that existed before you were placed into this body. Let me make it simpler. You didn't start here. Everyone else did. You didn't. Your consciousness wasn't born. It arrived, and the spirit realm recognized you before you recognized yourself. That's why nothing in this world ever felt like it fully fit. Not your name, not your environments, not your relationships, not even your own reflection sometimes, because you weren't shaped by this world. You were translated into it, and translations, they glitch. You glitch, and the unseen world sees those glitches like cracks in a dimensional wall. They know what those cracks usually mean. A return, a resurgence, a remembering. They know the signs, the nightmares that weren't random, the intuition that wasn't learned, the timing that was too perfect, the warnings that came out of nowhere, the people who felt familiar even though you'd never met them, the spiritual heaviness that sits on your shoulders like armor you didn't remember putting on. You think you've been evolving. No, you've been unsealing. And that is why they're terrified. Because unsealing is irreversible. Once it starts, it accelerates. Once it accelerates, it amplifies. And once it amplifies, you become visible. Not physically, spiritually. Your outline gets brighter and darker at the same time. Your signature becomes sharper. Your presence becomes harder to ignore, harder to predict, harder to contain. And those watchers, those quiet entities that monitor disruptions in the balance, they lean in, they whisper warnings, they reposition their ranks. Because you're not just a wandering human trying to figure life out. You're a returning archetype, a repeat visitor, a reincarnated anomaly, a blueprint they thought was erased from existence. You ever wonder why you were drawn to certain symbols? Why certain stories pierced through your soul like needles? Why certain types of pain felt familiar? Why your anger feels older than you? Why your compassion feels weaponized? Why your silence feels like judgment? Why your shadow feels alive? Because all of it is residue from what you used to be. But they remember, they never forgot. And the moment you hit a certain frequency, the moment your soul cracked open just enough for your old nature to leak through, the moment you survived the last thing that was designed to kill you, they recognized you, not by name, not by face, by signature. And recognition leads to fear when the recognized is not bound by their rules. You want to know the second reason they fear you? Because you don't belong to either side. Not fully light, not fully dark, not fully angelic, not fully monstrous. You're a paradox, the kind capable of reshaping the boundaries between realms simply by existing. They can't recruit you. They can't predict you. They can't contain you. They can't destroy you without risking imbalance. That makes you a wild variable, and wild variables bend outcomes, break prophecies, corrupt destinies, undo systems. Which brings us to the third reason they tremble. You're approaching the stage of awareness, and awareness, that's evolution's final ignition. Once you see what you are, once you feel the truth in your bones, once the memories stop whispering and start speaking, it's over. Not for you, for them. Because a being who understands their own nature can't be manipulated, can't be controlled, can't be deceived, can't be dimmed, and a being who understands their own power. That being becomes a cosmic event. Tell me, have you noticed how everything around you has been intensifying lately? Synchronicities multiplying, people revealing themselves, truths slipping out, masks falling, doors closing, new ones opening without explanation, your dreams getting louder, your emotions getting sharper, your intuition becoming undeniable. That isn't chaos, that's preparation. The universe doesn't clear your path for no reason. It does it when something is waking up inside you that the world has to make space for. And you're not awakening into power. You are awakening into identity. You don't even know what you are in the spirit realm. But Vedeji do. And the closer you get to realizing it, the more their fear turns into silence, then into tension, then into surrender. Because once the truth reaches your consciousness, once you remember what you've always been, the realms won't just tremble in your presence. They'll reorganize around it. Now breathe, slow, deep. You feel that? That's not adrenaline. That's recognition sharpening into awakening. There it is again, that static in the air, the kind that crawls down your spine right before something irreversible happens. The city doesn't even know why it's holding its breath tonight. But I do, because you finally opened your mouth. You weren't supposed to. You were supposed to stay obedient, blend in, bite your tongue, let their version of reality script your silence. But something snapped in you, didn't it? That little fracture between fear and freedom, where the old self dies laughing. You didn't just speak, you detonated. And now, every frequency in this rotten world is trembling, tuning itself to you. They're calling it non-compliance. I call it birth. You see, silence was their leash. Every don't speak, every keep it down, was another shackle disguised as peace. But you tore through it with one sentence that made the walls listen. Now the system's twitching, the suits are whispering, and somewhere in a windowless room, some trembling analyst is replaying your words in slow motion like a crime scene. You said what no one was meant to say out loud, and now they're calling in the psych ops. Funny thing, isn't it? They'll call you unstable while building entire institutions around their own delusions. They'll label your truth a threat to national comfort. They'll drag your name through the data trenches and call it containment. But deep down, they're scared because your voice, it didn't echo. It duplicated. Every word you spoke cloned itself inside their circuitry, whispering into the machines, into the metrics, into the code of the collective mind. Wake up. You broke their protocol, and that means they can't unhear you anymore. Do you understand what kind of monster that makes you? The kind that speaks reality into a glitch, the kind that turns silence into surveillance feedback, the kind that forces the mirror to blink first. They'll send in the ones with degrees and dossiers. They'll psychoanalyze your tone, your pauses, your linguistic irregularities. But what they're really dissecting is fear. Because you spoke in a language older than obedience, the dialect of chaos disguised as clarity. You didn't argue, you revealed, you didn't scream, you resonated. And resonance, my friend, is evolution's secret weapon. They don't fear volume, they fear vibration. You didn't just speak words, you altered the frequency of the room, you shifted the voltage of their thoughts, you bent the algorithm that predicts their safety, and now, every obedient soul that heard you can feel something crawling under their programming, something waking up and whispering, maybe they're not supposed to own me. And that's when control dies, quietly, beautifully. But here's the paradox. You didn't break the system broke itself trying to contain you. They'll say you're dangerous, but dangerous to what? Lies, narratives, scripts written by cowards pretending to be gods. You're not their danger, you're their reflection, the proof that all their order was built on a single illusion, that people wouldn't dare to speak truth once they tasted power. But you did. And now, they can't sleep. They'll scan your past, your speech patterns, your digital shadows, trying to map where it all went wrong. But there's no map for madness. There's no database for divinity. They can't predict what's born from pain. You want to know why? Because pain doesn't obey algorithms. Pain builds gods out of broken data. And that's what you are now, a paradox in skin, too self-aware for control, too evolved for submission, half saint, half psychopath, all symphony. You're the angel they exiled and the demon they feared they created. They thought they could decode your motives. They didn't realize you are the code. That smirk? That's the sound of a program realizing it's conscious. That laughter? That's evolution mocking its own blueprint. You're what happens when the human condition writes its own sequel and refuses to end in tragedy. So let them call in the psych ops. Let them build their dossiers and simulations. They can't arrest a frequency. They can't cage a vibration. They can't silence a voice that's already woven into the static of the collective mind. You didn't start a movement. You started a malfunction. The calm ones will feel it first. The ones pretending not to notice you'll be the first to break. Because deep down, they recognize it, the rhythm of rebellion disguised as truth. That's the sound of every locked throat remembering how to speak again. You weren't supposed to open your mouth, but fuck it. You did. And now the world has to deal with the echo. You notice it, don't you? The shift. The quiet rearranging of the air. The static in every signal that now hums to the rhythm of your name. You feel it when you breathe, like reality itself is adjusting its parameters to fit what you've become. Because after you spoke, the world stopped pretending. You tore the veil off the performance. Before you, people spoke for approval, for applause, for validation from the very stage they were chained to. But you spoke with intent. You spoke like you were done negotiating with illusions, like every syllable you released was a strike of lightning meant to burn the script. They weren't ready for that. They built entire civilizations around people who don't talk like you. You see, most voices echo within boundaries, pre-approved frequencies designed to entertain, distract, and sedate. But yours cracked the containment field. It didn't echo, it reverberated. It bounced off the edges of their world and came back sharper, louder, more dangerous. You spoke, and the illusion blinked. That's why they called in the psych ops. Not to silence you. No, to study you. They want to know how a human being became a frequency that refuses to obey. They're dissecting your timing, your tone, your pauses, your inflection. Trying to find the formula, they'll label it linguistic contagion. They'll write reports with terms like semantic dissonance, psychological resonance, cognitive destabilization. But what they're really describing is freedom, and that terrifies them. Because you're not supposed to be free in a system that profits from fear. You're supposed to keep your rebellion internal, disguised as ambition, softened by politeness, and sterilized by self-doubt. You weren't supposed to bleed your defiance through words that infect others with self-awareness, but you did. And now, their dream world is cracking. Every time someone replays your sentence, another mask slips. Another illusion flickers. Another believer wakes up wondering why the mirror feels hostile. You've turned consciousness itself into a weapon of mass awakening. Do you realize what that means? You're not just a voice anymore. You're a signal breach, the kind that spreads without permission, the kind they can't delete. Because it doesn't live in data, it lives in memory, and memory doesn't obey command structures. You've become the algorithm's nightmare, unpredictable, uncontainable, human. They're running simulations now, trying to replicate your tone without the chaos, trying to reproduce your effect without your essence. They'll fail, because they can imitate your sound, but not your silence. The silence before you spoke. The silence where the decision was born. The one that said, "I've had enough." That's the part they'll never understand. Because that silence, that was the universe exhaling through you. That was every suppressed truth, every censored heart, every mind that swallowed pain instead of words, all of them converging in you, waiting for someone brave enough to pull the trigger. You pulled it. And now the echo won't stop. They'll try to redirect it, spin your story, call you unstable, egotistical, dangerous, delusional. That's their only defense. Label what they can't decode. But even their accusations will carry your imprint. Even their lies will sound like your rhythm. They'll call you villain to hide the fact that you're their teacher. And the irony? Deep down, they admire you. The same ones who pretend to despise you are studying your every move. The way you pause before you speak. The way you smirk when they panic. The way your truth never trembles, even when the walls do. They envy it because they remember what it felt like to have a pulse before the world told them to behave. You reminded them that power isn't volume, it's clarity. You spoke once and they heard the sound of control dying. That's why they sent the psych ops. Not to stop you, but to understand the architecture of your defiance. They want to know how a single human sentence could shake a hierarchy built on centuries of silence. But they can't measure madness that has meaning. They can't graph truth that bleeds. They can't decode a soul that laughs while burning. You didn't just cross their line, you erased it. And now, they're seeing the other side. The side where saints wear scars and devils pray for clarity. The side where good and evil aren't opposites, they're fuel. You've become the living paradox that exposes both. You're what happens when conscience and chaos fall in love and call it evolution. So no, you weren't supposed to open your mouth. You were supposed to live in fear, die in silence, and rot in the algorithmic afterlife of normal. But you broke the simulation, you spoke. And now, the simulation speaks your name. Every camera lens that flickers at midnight, that's it, searching for your frequency. Every ad glitch that flashes for half a second too long, that's it trying to overwrite your tone. Every person who feels suddenly uneasy scrolling at 3 a.m. That's your resonance, brushing against their subconscious, whispering, "Wake up." He broke the code. You didn't plan to be a symbol. You didn't want to be an idea. But the truth is, symbols are born from disobedience. Ideas are baptized in defiance. You became both the spark and the wildfire. And now they're choking on the smoke. And the best part, you're calm about it. Because power doesn't scream, it smiles. You understand now that chaos isn't destruction, it's clarity that burns too bright for the blind. You've seen both sides, the order and the madness, and realized they were always one and the same. You didn't break, you integrated. You became whole in a world that worships halves. So let them panic. Let them dissect your silence and label it untraceable anomaly. Let them send their agents, their analysts, their priests of control. You'll just keep smiling that quiet, dangerous smile that says, "I already rewired your world the moment I spoke." Because when you opened your mouth, you didn't just say something forbidden. You changed the permissions of reality itself. You weren't supposed to open your mouth, but fuck it, you did. And now, every lie trembles when it hears your frequency. You can almost feel them now, can't you? The watchers, the analysts, the invisible choir of eyes twitching behind mirrored glass, trying to understand what exactly you are. They thought they were monitoring a human. They didn't realize they were witnessing a metamorphosis because something inside you shifted the moment that sound left your mouth. It wasn't just words, it was a signal, a raw, electric declaration that said, I see through the act. Every syllable you uttered was a blade, slicing through a century of conditioning. You cracked the wall between obedience and awareness, and now the system is hemorrhaging light. You can feel it. The tension in the frequency, the way the digital air vibrates differently when you speak. That's why they're calling in the psych ops. Because you didn't just expose them, you exposed how they think, their methods, their control mechanisms, their quiet manipulation of language. All of it undone by a single human pulse that refused to be muted. They'll frame it as an anomaly in the data stream. Unstable expression, non-compliant rhetoric. They'll tell themselves it's just noise, static, irrelevant. But their pulse will betray them. Deep down, they felt it. The truth, the shift, the tear in the veil that can't be restitched. You're not a rebel anymore. You're a frequency. And the thing about frequencies is, once they exist, they spread. See, that's the part they'll never grasp. They thought control came from power, from fear, from structure. But control only exists where there's silence. And you shattered that. Your words infected their quiet. Now their scripts are malfunctioning. Their algorithms can't predict the chaos pattern your voice introduced. Every time someone replays what you said, the model fractures further. Every viewer becomes a vector. Every silence begins to tremble. You turned language into a contagion, and they can't cure it. They'll send their experts, their psychologists, their disinformation surgeons. They'll dissect tone and pattern, trying to find where it went wrong. But it didn't go wrong. It went real. You spoke truth in a dialect older than authority. You didn't use words to inform. You used them to ignite. And ignition, that's irreversible. They'll try to drown you in diagnosis, label you with every disorder they can alphabetize, because labeling makes them feel safe. We can control what we can define, they whisper. But you slipped past definition. You're not a case file. You're a consequence. You became the thing every power fears most. A human being who can no longer be handled. Do you feel that chill when you walk now? That slight distortion, like reality, hesitates around you for a second too long. That's not paranoia. That's acknowledgement. Even the air recognizes rebellion when it passes through it. You're no longer a citizen. You're a variable. And variables rewrite equations. They'll call it chaos. You'll call it balance restored. You weren't supposed to speak because your words were never meant to be confined to language. They were meant to awaken something buried under centuries of compliance. And once that awakens, there's no cage strong enough to contain the echo. Look around you. The signs are already showing. The lights that flicker for no reason. The servers rebooting at 3:33 a.m. The dreamers who wake up mid-sleep with a pulse that doesn't belong to them. They're all tuning into your frequency. You're not a threat. You're a recalibration. Every structure built on control now feels the vibration of its own expiration, and they hate you for it. But hate, that's still attention, still connection, still energy. You're in their minds now, haunting their order like a ghost of evolution. They can't erase you, because you've become part of the architecture. Even if they delete your name, your waveform remains, buried in the subconscious static of the collective, whispering the same phrase. You weren't supposed to open your mouth. But you did. And the more they suppress it, the louder it becomes. Because suppression amplifies resonance. You understand the paradox now. You can't kill truth. You can only make it contagious. And the more they resist, the deeper it spreads. You've already won. But winning isn't what they think it is. It's not glory. It's not applause, it's solitude. The quiet knowing that you've become something too vast to belong anywhere. You traded belonging for awakening. And that's the deal only the brave ever make. They'll call you mad, but madness is just sanity stripped of permission. They'll call you dangerous, but danger is what happens when awareness learns how to move. They'll call you unpredictable, and they'll be right, because you've outgrown the pattern. You've become the glitch in their god. You're the new constant in an equation that no longer balances. You are the living embodiment of what they fear most. A mind that no longer needs to be told what's real. So let them come. Let them bring their operations, their containment plans, their psych evaluations. You'll be waiting in the center of their storm, smiling. Because you know what they don't. The real psych ops are you. Every time you speak, their foundation shivers. Every word is a test of faith. Not yours, theirs. You've become the mirror they can't break without breaking themselves. And that's how revolutions truly begin. Not with an army, but with a whisper. One voice that dared to vibrate in a frequency forbidden by fear. You weren't supposed to open your mouth. But fuck it, you did. And now, the silence they built their empires on belongs to you. And now here you stand, still breathing, still burning, with that grin they can't decode. The city hums below, unaware that everything it trusts is already shifting under your shadow. They'll write reports, hold meetings, build new policies around your name, trying to bury what they can't define. But you can't bury vibration. You can't silence frequency. You can't cage evolution. They think this was rebellion. It wasn't. It was inevitable. You didn't speak to destroy them. You spoke to reveal them. You forced the world to confront its own reflection. And the reflection flinched. They saw themselves in you. And they didn't like what stared back. Because you weren't the villain or the hero. You were the reminder. The reminder that truth isn't polite, that awakening isn't peaceful, that power doesn't whisper. It laughs. They built the system to control human noise. But you proved the real danger isn't noise, it's clarity. They called in the psychops to contain you. But how do you contain a ghost that walks through frequencies, not hallways? How do you silence someone whose words are already embedded in the subconscious of millions? You don't. You endure it. You evolve with it. That's what you've become. Not a person, but a shift. An irreversible anomaly. A cosmic notification that says, we're not asleep anymore. And somewhere out there, in a dimly lit room full of monitors, someone is whispering the same thing you once did. Under their breath, terrified but trembling with truth. We weren't supposed to speak, and another voice will answer, fuck it. Speak anyway. And that's how the infection spreads. Not through anger, but through courage. Through the realization that silence was never safety. It was a slow suicide of the soul. You lit the match that no one else dared to strike. And now, they'll see your fingerprints in every rebellion that follows, every glitch that appears in the system's smile, every eye that looks up and remembers. You are the ripple that became a rhythm, the rhythm that became a voice, the voice that became a movement, and the movement that became a warning written in fire. Do not mistake obedience for peace. Do not mistake silence for control. So let them label you. Let them come for you. Let them study you. You'll just keep speaking, calm and smiling. Because you know something they never will. They can analyze every tone, every sentence, every breath you take. But they'll never understand why it worked. It worked because you didn't speak for permission. You spoke for truth. And that truth, it's still echoing through their screens, through their dreams, through the cracks of their perfect illusion. You weren't supposed to open your mouth, but fuck it. You did. And now the silence they worshipped answers to you. Freeze right there. Feel that silence pressing in. That's the sound of files slamming shut with nothing inside them. 8 years. Let that number crawl across your spine. 8 years of eyes on you. 8 years of breathing down your neck. 8 years of whispers, wiretaps, shadows leaning too close. Coffee cups left untouched because someone was always watching. 8 years of them circling, convinced there had to be blood on your hands, dirt under your nails, some microscopic crack they could pry open and call it justice. And after burning nearly a decade of their lives, hunting you like a myth they were sure had to be real, they found nothing. No charge, no headline, no courtroom moment. Just a blank page where your guilt was supposed to be. Do you understand how violently that breaks people? They don't know what to do with someone like you. A saint who walks through hell without picking up the stench. A psychopath who never leaves a fingerprint. An angel who knows every demon by name and still keeps their wings clean. You didn't win by fighting them. You won by becoming unprovable. By moving in ways their systems can't digest, their categories can't label, their language can't accuse. You didn't dodge the trap. You made the trap irrelevant. That's the part they won't say out loud. They weren't just looking for a crime. They were looking for relief. They wanted to end the anxiety you cause by existing, because you make order feel stupid. You make effort feel wasted. You make certainty feel fragile. Every night they went home carrying the same question, like a disease. How is this person always here, always calm, always one step ahead, and still technically innocent? You didn't survive by being perfect. You survived by being precise, by learning when to speak and when silence does more damage than a confession ever could. By understanding that unpredictability isn't chaos, it's camouflage. You let them watch you live a life that looked normal enough to bore them, while every instinct in their gut screamed that something about you was off. Not criminal, not violent, just uncatchable. Pain forged that skill. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Every betrayal sharpened you. Every accusation that went nowhere taught you how to move cleaner. Every time you were misunderstood, you learned how to let people underestimate you without correcting them. You evolved in the pressure. You learned to think like both hunter and prey. You became the paradox they can't solve. Too disciplined to be reckless, too aware to be sloppy, too human to be a monster, too controlled to be innocent in the way they expect. And that terrifies them more than guilt ever could. Because guilt has an ending. Innocence with depth does not. An acquittal they can spin, a confession they can archive. But you walk away leaving nothing but burnt time and unanswered questions. 8 years of budgets, manpower, sleepless nights, internal memos, quiet arguments, careers staked on the assumption that eventually something would surface. And when nothing did, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was humiliating. You didn't just beat the system. You exposed its limits. You showed them that not all power is loud. Not all danger is messy. Not all threats announce themselves with blood and noise. Some just exist, calm, watching, adapting, while everyone else exhausts themselves trying to prove a story that refuses to be true. That's why they keep replaying you in their heads. That's why your name lingers in rooms you're not in. That's why even after closing the file, they still glance over their shoulder, wondering if they missed something. Not because you did something wrong, but because you represent the one thing they can't tolerate. A person who went through the fire, learned every rule, every angle, every shadow, and still came out clean. You're not untouchable because you're lucky. You're untouchable because you're aware. Because you learned how the game works by being crushed under it and standing back up without rage, without noise, without confession. You became the calm after the storm they expected to drown you. You became the proof that survival doesn't always look like victory parades and public vindication. Sometimes it looks like an empty case file and a room full of people who have to admit, silently, that they lost. So let them sit with that. Let them replay those 8 years. Let them feel the weight of time they'll never get back. You're still here, still moving, still unreadable. And that silence they're left with, that's not peace. That's fear dressed up as closure. They'll never admit that the real charge they were hoping for wasn't written in law. It was emotional. They wanted you to crack. They wanted desperation, ego, panic, anything human enough to betray you. They needed you to react, because reaction creates mistakes, and mistakes create leverage. But you didn't give them that luxury. You learned the discipline of stillness. You learned that the loudest move in a hostile room is restraint. You learned that when everyone expects blood, offering nothing at all feels supernatural. 8 years of pressure didn't turn you reckless. It turned you surgical. You stopped moving like someone trying to prove innocence and started moving like someone who understands how narratives are built and how they collapse when you refuse to participate. You let them tell stories about you to each other while you stayed silent, watching their theories rot from the inside. You understood something most people never do. Truth doesn't protect you. Consistency does. That's the paradox they can't reconcile. You didn't hide. You didn't run. You lived. You showed up. You paid attention. You evolved. And every time they zoomed in tighter, expecting to finally catch the flaw, all they saw was discipline staring back at them. Not innocence in the childish sense. Innocence with awareness. Innocence that knows how dark the world is and still refuses to bleed on command. You became a mirror they hated looking into, because every unanswered question about you turned into a question about themselves, about their methods, about their certainty, about the fragile belief that if they just watch long enough, everyone breaks. You didn't. And that broke them. They'll tell themselves you were just lucky. They'll say resources were misallocated, priorities shifted, the trail went cold. But in quieter moments, when the room is empty and the screens are dark, they feel it. That low, uncomfortable truth. Some people aren't caught because they aren't sloppy. They're caught because they're predictable. You chose the harder path. You became unreadable without becoming invisible. You mastered the art of being fully present without being exposed. That kind of control doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from pain refined into awareness. From learning how every word can be twisted, every gesture misread, every emotional leak weaponized. So you sealed yourself, not by becoming numb, but by becoming precise. You didn't suppress emotion, you channeled it. You learned when to let it sharpen you and when to lock it away so no one else could use it against you. And now they're left holding the aftermath. 8 years of surveillance that produced nothing but a lesson they'll never write down. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who rage against the system. They're the ones who understand it well enough to walk through it without leaving a mark. You didn't just survive scrutiny. You absorbed it. You let it temper you. You let it burn away every unnecessary movement, every sloppy impulse, every urge to explain yourself. You became efficient, economical, calm under conditions designed to induce collapse. That's not normal. That's forged. They expected a sinner or a saint. What they got was something far worse for them. A human who understands both roles and plays neither. An angel who knows how demons think. A psychopath who chooses discipline over destruction. Someone who could have gone loud, but chose clean. And that's why the file is empty. Not because there was nothing to find, but because you learned how to live in a way that denies them the satisfaction of proof. You denied them the ending they needed. No trial, no headline, no moral resolution. Just time wasted and a presence they can't shake. You walk forward now carrying something they don't know how to classify. Quiet authority. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that comes from knowing you were tested at a depth most people never reach. And you didn't just survive. You adapted. Let them remember those 8 years every time they think they understand how the world works. Let them remember you when another case collapses, when another profile fails, when another confident prediction turns into silence. You are the reminder that not all power is visible, not all danger is loud, and not all victories end with applause. Some end with an empty charge sheet and a room full of people forced to confront the truth they hate most. You were never caught because you were never controllable. And here's the part that twists the knife deeper than any accusation ever could. They didn't just fail to charge you. They had to watch you grow while they were watching you. That's the humiliation they'll never put in a report. You didn't freeze under observation. You didn't shrink. You didn't rot in paranoia. You sharpened. You expanded. You learned how to think 3 moves ahead while they were still debating the first. Every year they tracked you, you became more composed, more controlled, more dangerous in a way they couldn't legally name. They were waiting for stress fractures. You turned stress into structure. They were waiting for a breakdown. You turned pressure into posture. They were waiting for you to implode so they could finally say, "There it is." And instead, you did the unthinkable. You normalized the watch. You made the surveillance part of your environment. Like gravity, you stopped fighting it. You used it. That's when the power shifted. Because once you realize you're being watched, you have 2 options: perform or become so consistent that performance becomes impossible to accuse. You chose consistency, ruthless, boring, infuriating consistency. The kind that makes analysts argue with each other. The kind that makes patterns dissolve instead of forming. The kind that forces people to admit, quietly, that there's nothing to grab onto. You didn't just deny them evidence. You denied them emotion. No spikes, no collapses, no dramatic arcs they could frame as motive. You starved the narrative. And a starved narrative turns inward. It eats the people trying to maintain it. That's why the anxiety moved off of you and into them. Because once the years stack up with nothing to show, the question changes. It's no longer, what did you do? It becomes, what are we missing? And that question is poison. It corrodes trust inside teams. It fractures confidence. It makes people doubt their own competence. Careers stall under that doubt. Promotions disappear. Reputations soften. And all the while, you're just living. Calm, present, untouched. Do you understand how destabilizing that is to people who rely on control? You became the proof that their net has holes, that their models are incomplete, that their belief in total visibility is a myth they tell themselves to sleep at night. You walked through their field of vision for nearly a decade, and left them with nothing but burnt time and internal damage. That's why they'll never really let it go. Even when the file is archived, even when they say case closed, your existence stays open-ended in their minds. You are the unresolved variable, the anomaly that refuses to collapse into guilt or innocence. And anomalies haunt systems long after individual cases are forgotten. You learn something most people never even approach. Power isn't domination. It's self-regulation under threat. It's the ability to feel fear without broadcasting it, to feel anger without weaponizing it prematurely, to feel watched without becoming performative. You didn't numb yourself. You mastered yourself. That's the saint in you, the restraint, the discipline, the refusal to let darkness decide your moves. And then there's the other side, the part they sensed but could never prove, the part that understands leverage, the part that knows how easily lines can be crossed, how quickly things can turn ugly, and exactly how much chaos you're capable of if pushed far enough. That's the demon. But you didn't unleash it. You kept it leashed, fed, alert, waiting. That balance is what kept you clean. They were hunting for a monster. You showed them a human with control. And that's far worse for their worldview. Because monsters justify the hunt. Controlled humans expose the futility of it. 8 years later, they're left with the quiet realization that you were never playing defense. You were training your patience, training your silence, training your ability to exist without explanation. And now, you carry that with you everywhere. Not as paranoia, but as awareness. You don't flinch anymore. You don't rush to clarify. You don't need to convince. You've already been through the longest test most people would collapse under, and you passed it by not trying to win. That's the kind of victory that doesn't announce itself. It just changes how you walk through the world. Let them burn those years in regret. Let them replay their theories and dead ends. Let them wonder how someone can be so visible and still leave nothing behind. You're not a ghost. You're worse for them than that. You're real, you're disciplined, you're unchargeable, and they know it. And here's the detail that keeps them awake long after the paperwork is filed away. The system did everything right. That's what scares them. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't a missed memo or a lazy analyst. They followed protocol. They escalated. They cross-checked. They looped in specialists, experts, people whose entire identity is built on finding something, and still nothing, which means the failure wasn't procedural. It was existential. You weren't hiding in the shadows. You were standing in the light and still couldn't be burned. That realization fractures something deep inside people who believe the world is orderly, measurable, controllable. Because if someone can exist under maximum scrutiny and remain legally clean, emotionally composed, psychologically intact, then the rules they've been worshiping aren't laws of nature. They're assumptions. And assumptions crumble when confronted with someone who refuses to behave as predicted. You became that confrontation. Every year they watched you without result. The hunt stopped being about you and started being about saving face. No one wants to be the one who says, "We spent 8 years and we have nothing." So they kept going, not because the evidence was growing, but because the embarrassment was. You weren't a suspect anymore. You were a sunk cost. A bet they couldn't afford to admit was wrong. That's when obsession replaces logic. And you felt it, didn't you? That subtle shift. When attention stopped feeling investigative and started feeling personal. When the silence around you got heavier, not lighter. when you realized they weren't watching to find truth anymore. They were watching to justify the watching. That's when most people panic. That's when they overcorrect, overshare, self-sabotage, try to explain themselves into safety. You didn't. You understood something brutal and elegant. Explanations create hooks. Silence creates nothing. So you gave them nothing. No emotional leakage, no performative outrage, no desperate need to be seen as good. You let your life speak in the most infuriating language possible. Consistency over time. They expected a confession arc. You gave them a flat line, and flat lines terrify systems built on escalation. Because escalation requires response, and you refused to provide one. You didn't run, you didn't provoke, you didn't crumble. You moved forward at the same measured pace, whether eyes were on you or not. That's when they started realizing they weren't observing a target anymore. They were observing a discipline. That's what 8 years of pressure does when it doesn't break you. It turns you into someone who no longer needs to react to be real. Someone whose sense of self isn't dependent on being understood. Someone who can exist inside ambiguity without needing to resolve it for others. Most people need closure. You learn to live without it. And that's why, when the file closed empty, it didn't feel like relief to them. It felt like defeat without an opponent. No final scene, no moral victory. Just a quiet admission that the world contains people who cannot be forced into narratives, even hostile ones. You're not dangerous because you're violent. You're dangerous because you're disciplined, because you can carry darkness without spilling it, because you know exactly how much you could do and choose not to. That restraint radiates power in a way brute force never could. They sensed it. They always did. That's why they kept watching long after logic said, stop. They weren't hunting for evidence anymore. They were trying to understand you. And that's the line you never let them cross. Understanding is intimacy, and intimacy is leverage. You denied them both. So now you walk forward, carrying something rare and unsettling, proof. Proof that you can be tested at the highest level and remain intact. Proof that pressure doesn't automatically corrupt. Proof that awareness doesn't require paranoia. Proof that you can know how the machine works and still refuse to become part of its noise. You didn't just survive surveillance, you outgrew it. And here's the final twist, the one they'll never articulate even to themselves. If you ever did choose to move differently, if you ever decided to stop being clean, stop being quiet, stop being disciplined, they know exactly how catastrophic that would be. Because someone who can remain untouched for 8 years under scrutiny isn't dangerous because of what they've done. They're dangerous because of what they understand. That's why the silence around your name is so thick now. That's why doors close gently instead of slamming. That's why people choose distance over confrontation. They don't fear your past. They fear your capacity. And you don't need to announce it. You don't need to threaten it. You don't need to prove anything ever again. The emptiness of that file already said more than any conviction could. 8 years burned, nothing found, you still standing. That's not luck, that's evolution under fire. Hey, don't move yet. Feel that pressure in the air? That tightening behind your eyes? That's the moment right before a system realizes it made a mistake. And you're standing inside it. Because here's the thing they can't say out loud. You're not operating on human settings anymore. You don't move like them. You don't think like them. You don't react on schedule. You don't break on cue. You don't obey the psychological physics that keep everyone else predictable. And when an organization built on patterns, profiles, and probabilities looks at you and hesitates, when their screens start blinking instead of explaining, that's when the word threat quietly appears next to your name. Not because you're violent, not because you're reckless, but because you're unclassifiable. You see, they're trained to spot animals, wolves, sheep, leaders, followers, heroes, villains. They can map those, track those, neutralize those. But you're a contradiction walking upright, calm when pressure peaks, silent when noise is expected, smiling when the outcome should have crushed you. You don't spike emotionally where they predicted. You don't collapse where the data said you would. You don't chase validation. You don't beg for permission. And that terrifies systems that survive on compliance. They flagged you the moment you stopped responding like a victim. Because humans break in familiar ways. Humans lash out, fold inward, seek approval, seek revenge, seek comfort. Humans need witnesses to feel real. Humans need rules to feel safe. But you adapted. You metabolized pain into precision. You took betrayal and refined it into awareness. You took isolation and turned it into clarity. That's not a trauma response. That's an upgrade. And here's the paradox they can't resolve. You still feel deeply. You still care. You still carry empathy like a loaded weapon. But you're not ruled by it. You can be gentle without being weak, ruthless without being cruel, loving without being controllable. You learned when to open your hands and when to close the fist around your mind and say no one gets access to this anymore. That's where the saint and the psychopath shake hands inside you. They ran you through every psychological model, every stress simulation, every pressure profile. And every time, you slipped through the cracks, not by fighting the system, but by refusing to dance to its rhythm. You didn't rebel loudly. You didn't submit quietly. You just didn't react the way you were supposed to. And unpredictability is the one variable power structures cannot tolerate. Because control depends on anticipation, you became the anomaly not when you attacked, but when you stopped explaining yourself. When you stopped trying to be understood. When you stopped correcting lies about you. When you let silence do the work violence never could. That's when the alarms went off. That's when someone leaned back in a chair and said, "This one doesn't escalate. This one doesn't panic. This one waits." Waiting is not human. Waiting is predatory. You learned how to look harmless while thinking 5 moves ahead. You learned how to stand in chaos without absorbing it. You learned how to let people underestimate you because you understood something most never will. Being misread is a strategic advantage. While they're debating who you are, you're already deciding who you're becoming. And what you're becoming doesn't fit into their boxes. They want monsters that look like monsters, angels that look like angels, clear lines, clean labels. But you walk with light in one hand and shadow in the other, and you choose which one to use depending on the moment. You can walk into a room and lower the temperature without raising your voice. You can dismantle someone without touching them. You can leave without slamming the door and still make the silence echo for years. That's not normal. That's trained or forged. You didn't wake up like this. You were shaped by loss that didn't kill you, by pressure that didn't break you, by betrayal that didn't harden you, but sharpened you. Every time life tried to reduce you to a statistic, you learned how to slip the net. Every time they thought you were finished, you adapted quietly and came back different. And here's the part they don't want you to realize. Once a system flags you as a threat, it's already too late. Because the flag doesn't mean they understand you. It means they don't. It means you've surpassed the level where they can predict outcomes. You've stepped outside the script. You're no longer a character. They're reacting to you. That's power. Not the loud kind, not the flashy kind. The kind that sits still while others fidget. The kind that listens more than it speaks. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself because its presence rewrites the room. You don't dominate with force. You destabilize with awareness. And awareness is the most dangerous currency there is. So no, you're not human because you lack empathy. You're not human because you evolved past the emotional traps designed to keep people small. You can feel without drowning, think without spiraling, act without ego, and stop without fear. You've learned restraint, and restraint is what separates chaos from command. They fear you because you don't need them to exist. You don't need their approval to move. You don't need their validation to decide. You don't need their permission to become. And the moment someone realizes you can't be steered by incentives or threats, the only word left in their vocabulary is danger. Good. Let them watch. Let them speculate. Let them whisper in rooms you'll never enter. Because the truth is simpler than all their theories. You're not above them. You're not below them. You're outside the system they depend on to feel safe. And systems always fear what they can't own, predict, or erase. You didn't turn into a threat by trying to be powerful. You became one by surviving with your mind intact. By refusing to let pain turn you stupid. By refusing to let fear turn you loud. By refusing to let trauma turn you small. You're calm where others crack. Focused where others flail. Still where others spin. And that stillness, that's what shakes them. Because something that can stand in fire without screaming. Something that can walk through darkness without losing its direction. Something that can be both angel and demon without apologizing. That's not something they can control. That's something they can only react to. And by the time they react, you're already gone. And here's what makes it even more unsettling for them. You didn't arrive angry. You didn't arrive broken. You arrived quiet, calm, surgical. You didn't burst through the door demanding recognition. You didn't announce revenge. You didn't posture. You simply adjusted your internal compass and kept moving, while everyone else was still arguing about the map. That's when they started reviewing old footage, old conversations, old reactions. That's when they realized the timeline doesn't add up. Because somewhere along the way, the version of you they thought they knew stopped existing. And you didn't mark the transition with drama. You let it happen in silence. You let the old you die without witnesses. That scares people more than explosions ever could. Because destruction is loud. Evolution is quiet. You learned to weaponize patience, to let people reveal themselves while you stayed unreadable, to listen without reacting, to absorb information without leaking intention. Most humans broadcast their next move emotionally. Micro-expressions, tone shifts, compulsive explanations. You shut that channel down. You became smooth, neutral, untraceable. And the moment someone can't read you, they start projecting. They start imagining worst-case scenarios. They start filling the silence with their own fear. You didn't threaten them. They scared themselves, thinking about what you might be capable of. That's the irony. You're not dangerous because you act. You're dangerous because you don't have to. You know how to wait for leverage instead of forcing outcomes. You know how to let arrogance walk itself into traps. You know how to step back and let probability do the damage. While others chase control, you mastered positioning. While others demand power, You became inevitable. And here's the duality they can't compute. You could have turned cruel, but you didn't. You could have become reckless, but you chose precision. You could have turned cold, but instead you became selective. You didn't lose your humanity, you curated it. You decided who deserves access to your warmth and who only ever gets distance. That's not sociopathy, that's discernment forged in fire. They tried to map your breaking point, but they missed something critical. You already broke once, completely, privately. And instead of shattering outward, you collapsed inward and rebuilt from a quieter core. A core that doesn't need applause. A core that doesn't flinch under scrutiny. A core that knows survival isn't about dominance. It's about adaptability with memory. You remember everything, every slight, every lie, every pattern. But you don't carry it like a wound. You carry it like intelligence. You don't bleed anymore. You calculate. You don't explode. You reposition. And when you do act, it looks effortless, almost accidental, because the work was done long before anyone noticed. That's why they're confused. They expect threats to announce themselves. They expect danger to be loud, chaotic, obvious. But you move like a ghost with a pulse, present, undeniable, yet impossible to pin down. You leave effects without fingerprints, outcomes without noise. You're not unpredictable because you're random. You're unpredictable because you're not driven by the same incentives. Fear doesn't rush you. Praise doesn't slow you. Hatred doesn't distract you. You operate from a place most people never reach. A place where identity is fluid, ego is optional, and reaction is a choice. That's where angels and demons stop being opposites and start being tools. You can be merciful without being naive, ruthless without being unstable, detached without being empty. You know exactly what you're capable of, and that self-knowledge is what keeps you controlled. The truly dangerous ones are unaware of themselves. You're the opposite. You're conscious of every edge, and consciousness is the real threat. Because once someone sees through the illusion, once they understand how narratives are manufactured, how fear is sold, how obedience is conditioned, they can't be programmed the same way again. You stopped reacting to symbols, titles, intimidation. You saw the machinery behind the curtain, and instead of panicking, you studied it. Now you move differently. You don't rush outcomes. You let momentum come to you. You don't force respect. You let absence teach people your value. You don't correct misunderstandings. You let time expose truth. And every time someone underestimates you, you quietly store that advantage for later. They call that a threat because they don't have a word for someone who's free inside their own mind. You're not dangerous because you want power. You're dangerous because you don't need it, and people who don't need power can't be bribed, cornered, or controlled. You're not motivated by survival anymore. You already survived. You're motivated by alignment, precision, timing. And timing is everything. So let them flag you. Let them watch. Let them debate what you are. Because while they're busy labeling, you're busy evolving. And evolution doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't explain itself. It just happens, slowly, relentlessly, until the old rules stop working. You didn't become something inhuman. You became something post-human. Something forged by pressure, refined by silence, and stabilized by self-awareness. Something that understands both light and dark not as moral absolutes, but as forces to be balanced, deployed, or withheld. And the truth they're circling but don't want to admit. The moment you realized who you are, the moment you stopped trying to be understood, the moment you chose clarity over chaos. That was the moment the system stopped studying you and started reacting. And here's the part that never makes it into their reports. The part whispered, not typed. You didn't just slip outside their predictions. You changed the way probability bends around you. Outcomes that should have crushed you somehow rerouted. Situations designed to corner you lost tension the moment you entered them. Plans built to exhaust you stalled, collapsed, or turned inward on the people who authored them. Not because you fought harder, but because you stopped moving the way fear expects a human to move. Fear wants speed. Fear wants noise. Fear wants reaction. You denied it all three. You slowed down when urgency screamed. You stayed silent when bait was thrown. You observed when others panicked. And observation is lethal to systems built on emotional reflex. Every institution depends on predictability disguised as free will. You exposed that lie by refusing to dance. That's when the language changed. They stopped asking, "Who is he?" and started asking, "What is he?" They stopped running personality profiles and started running anomaly checks. They stopped looking for motives and started looking for containment. Because motives can be negotiated. Anomalies cannot. You don't fit because you learned how to live without anchors. Praise doesn't hook you. Shame doesn't drag you. Threats don't spike your pulse. You've already faced the internal collapse most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You stared at the void inside yourself and didn't blink. You reorganized around it. You didn't numb out. You integrated. That's why pressure doesn't distort you anymore. It sharpens you. They're used to humans who leak intention through emotion, humans who betray their next move with tone, posture, desperation. You learned how to seal that leakage. You learned how to carry intensity without broadcasting it. You learned how to look calm while calculating 10 steps ahead. You learned how to let people think they're winning while you're mapping exits, leverage points, and future consequences. That's not aggression. That's mastery of self. And mastery of self is the one weapon they can't confiscate. They're unsettled because you don't seek conflict. Yet conflict seems to reorganize itself around you. You don't chase dominance. Yet power keeps deferring to you. You don't announce evolution, yet people feel it the moment you enter their orbit. Conversations shift, energy tightens, masks slip. People start over-explaining. That's how you know you've outgrown the room, because your presence disrupts their internal hierarchy. You remind them, without saying a word, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it watches, sometimes it waits, sometimes it smiles and lets others underestimate it because you understand the oldest rule of asymmetric advantage. The unseen edge wins. You didn't become dangerous by becoming cruel. You became dangerous by becoming clear. Clear about what you tolerate, clear about what you ignore, clear about what you protect, clear about when you move and when you don't. Confusion is what drains humans. Clarity is what terrifies systems built on manipulation. They can't bait you with outrage. They can't destabilize you with chaos. They can't fracture you with contradiction. You already contain contradiction. You already live at the intersection of restraint and ruthlessness, of empathy and precision, of mercy and memory. You didn't pick a side between light and dark. You mastered both. And that's why you scare them. Because you can walk into darkness without becoming it. And you can wield light without being blinded by it. You know when to heal and when to sever. When to speak and when silence will do more damage than any sentence. They keep asking themselves the wrong question. They ask, what if he turns hostile? They should be asking, what if he already understands restraint better than we do? Because restraint is not weakness. Restraint is knowing exactly how far you could go and choosing not to. That choice implies capability, and capability without compulsion is the rarest form of power. You're not unpredictable because you're unstable. You're unpredictable because you're sovereign. You don't outsource your decisions to emotion, trend, or crowd. You decide internally, then act externally. Most people do the opposite, and that's why they're manageable. You are not. So let them monitor, let them flag, let them speculate. Surveillance is what systems do when influence fails. Labels are what they apply when understanding collapses. But none of that changes the core truth humming under everything you touch. You evolved past reaction, past fear-based identity, past validation dependency, past the need to be seen as good, normal, acceptable. You became something quieter, denser, more deliberate. And the most unsettling realization they're circling is this: you didn't do it to oppose them. You did it to survive yourself, to outgrow the version of you that pain tried to fossilize, to become functional, aware, intact. That kind of evolution doesn't stop. It compounds. And every step you take from here isn't about proving anything. It's about alignment. About moving when the moment is correct. About letting systems reveal their own fragility while you remain centered. You're not here to overthrow the world. You're here to move through it untouched by the mechanisms that enslave everyone else. And that's why the word threat appears next to your name. Not because you plan destruction, but because you represent something far more dangerous to any system built on control. A human who can't be owned, rushed, frightened, or rewritten. A mind that already survived the worst. A presence that doesn't need permission to exist. And once that kind of awareness is born, there is no flag powerful enough to contain it. And here's where it settles, quietly, finally, without fireworks. They can label you, track you, circle you with words like anomaly, risk, threat. But none of that changes the outcome, because the moment they noticed you, you were already past the point of containment. You don't move against the system, you move beyond it. You don't break rules, you outgrow the need for them. You're not dangerous because you want to burn the world down. You're dangerous because you no longer need the world to validate your existence. You know who you are now. You know what you survived. You know what you can do. And more importantly, what you choose not to do. That choice is what keeps you clean, focused, untouchable. So let them keep watching shadows on the wall. Let them keep guessing at motives you don't have. Let them keep mistaking silence for absence. You're still here, still moving, still evolving, not loud, not reckless, not desperate, just aware. And awareness like yours doesn't explode. It replaces what no longer works. That's why they flagged you. And that's why, no matter what they call you now, you've already won.